Welcome to the webinar. My name is Phil Sharon. I'm Executive Vice President at Think Company. I kind of cover, just do some of the introductions to our webinars and introduce our panelists and go through some of the, why does it keep going forward? And hit some of the topics around that. For those of you who don't know Think Company, we're a user experience and technology firm. We're a consulting company, and we have a bunch of user experience designers and technologists and researchers and content strategists. We're based in Philadelphia and Denver, although right now we're all based everywhere around the world. We're learning more about working virtually, I think, and where you are physically doesn't matter as much anymore in the work world, which is an interesting byproduct of this, of the isolation and pandemic that we're all living under. But we help our clients achieve their business goals by improving both digital and human experiences for their customers and employees. And that's why I'm really excited about the topic for today, because we're going to talk a little bit about service design. I don't want to take anyone's thunder away, but you know, we'll talk about how sort of the digital and non-digital world can be impacted by taking a design perspective towards those things. And that's something Think Company does quite often. We'll start working on digital products and then really understand that it impacts people in their analog world as well. So that's a little bit about Think Company. If you're interested, you can always go to thinkcompany.com to learn a little bit more about us. And in fact, we started doing these webinars at the beginning of the pandemic when we all started locking down, because we are usually really involved in community events with different organizations, and we talk about what we do, and we try to provide value to people in our community, both in the design and technology community and out. So we thought we could do these in webinars, and they've been very successful up till now. If anyone is interested in talking to Think Company about some interesting things going on in your organization, please reach out to us. You don't need to write down this post. I think we share these links in the emails that we send out afterwards. But we're happy to have conversations and connect you with some of our experts in all the areas of service that we provide. And so that's the end of the plug for Think Company. But if you're interested in any kind of interactions with us, just please feel free to reach out, and we'd love to schedule some time with you. We do have some other upcoming events. The next one is another exciting event. I get excited about all of our events. There's an organization called Policy Map, and they take publicly available data and they help you map that data into a geographic mapping tool. And on October 29th, Lizzie Manning, who is a senior experience designer at Think Company, is going to join forces with Craig Henderson, who's the CTO over at Policy Map, and the chief of product development over at Policy Map. And they're going to talk about modernizing their platform to democratize data. So I think it's a great follow-up to this topic that we're going to be talking about today. Policy Map is a tool that enables people to apply data to online maps to gain insights on business, community, policy issues. And we've been working with them for a few years on both design and technology issues to improve the performance of their tool and make it easier to access and digest that data. So if you're interested in that topic, it's a really fascinating tool. They're great people to talk about. Then please join us on October 29th from 3 to 4 p.m. Eastern. Coming up after that on November 17th and 19th, we're going to be offering an inclusive design workshop. We often do this workshop with our clients on a paid basis, but we do them publicly as well. So there's limited seating available. Last I checked, I think we had 15 of the 20 seats that are, 5 seats open. There's about 15 seats taken on this. So if you're interested in this topic, jump at the chance to take the workshop. And that again is November 17th and 19th from 6 to 8:30 p.m. Eastern. And again, we'll be sharing links to all of these events coming up. So just before we go into the webinar, I just want to hit a couple of the ground rules on the webinar. Of course, I blocked my ability to read the ground rules with all these windows, so give me 1 second. So here are the ground rules. So the platform by default will mute all of you. So we can't hear you, but you can hear us. There will be a live Q&A session at about 3:45 if I can stop talking and get to our panelists as quickly as we can. We will take the Q&A session to as late as 4:30. So if you want to stick around for an extra half hour past the posted date time, then you're welcome to stay. In the meantime, if questions come up during the talk, please post them in the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. So if you look down, there's a little button that says Q&A. If you click on that, you can enter a question. If you enter it and choose anonymous, then we won't know who you are, and I will ask your question. But what we'd love to do is have you not choose anonymous, in which case I will unmute you when your question comes up, and that'll give you an opportunity to ask the question yourself. So if you don't want to be on the air, if you don't have a microphone, if you don't feel like being heard, then please feel free to post it as an anonymous question. Just another note, some folks in past sessions have tried to post questions in chat, and we encourage you to move that over to the Q&A tool. And they also tend to post, especially in topics around social justice, they tend to post their positions or their thoughts in Q&A, and we're really trying to encourage conversational questions in Q&A. So pick your channel for what you're doing for that, so that we can put it in the right place. Even if you don't have a question, check out the Q&A channel every once in a while, because you can also upvote questions, and I'll use the upvoting tool to select which questions are the most popular and make sure that we ask them first. We may not get to all the questions depending on where we are at 4:30, but we'll use that ranking tool to try and get to as many as we can. And there are moderators in both chat and Q&A, so if you have any kinds of issues, just please feel free to engage us over there. And if you want to do it privately, you just choose talking to the panelists on their own. So without any further ado, if I can get my screen to advance to the next slide. So I'd like to officially kick off this webinar, Service Design for Voting. I'm going to introduce you to our presenters, John Young and Dan Singer. John and Dan are experienced election workers who also have UX and technology backgrounds. Dan and John, welcome. The floor is yours. So you can tell us about how we can apply service design principles to the voting process. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and hide my camera, and the floor is yours. Thanks, John, Dan.
Very good. Dan, are you able to hear me?
I am, yes.
Oh, good. Okay, cool. What I think I'm sharing right now is the title slide that says Service Design for Voting. Does that look right?
That is what you're sharing.
Great. Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is John Young. I'm a judge of elections sometimes, and the other JOEs in here, you might have the same thing. When people say judge of elections, they go, oh, wow. And I say like, no. Judge of elections is small. Voting is local. Voting is a very local thing. Voting rules are set at the national and state level. Elections are operated at the county level. And then the people on the ground are actually in very small areas. How small? Well, here's a picture of some of the precincts in Tredyffrin. On November 3rd, I'm going to be running 2 precincts. One of them is Tredyffrin West 4, which you can see on the left side of the screen in green. Tredyffrin West 4 is small. It's just those streets. There's 918 registered voters in Tredyffrin West 4, plus the people that have registered since we last did the numbers. And there's a whole entire crew that is just focused on getting the votes from people living in that spot in Tredyffrin West 4. Polls are a very, very local thing, and voting is a very, very local thing, and that's on purpose. And I want to tell you a story about a challenge at a particular precinct that I was running in 2016. This precinct that I was running in 2016 happened to be in Westchester University, a 2,000 voter precinct. It's all college students. The challenge with college students is they often don't know whether they are registered in their residence hall or they are registered back at home. And the reason they don't know that is because there's registration drives happening all the time at Westchester University. And they aren't given clear instructions about what address they should put down because no one really knows about that. So as a result, in 2016, I had a lot of voters coming in, a lot of college students coming in that just didn't show up in the books at all. The reason they didn't show up in the books was maybe because they had been registered at home. But the challenge was that the registration drive had actually sent their information to the wrong address in Harrisburg. And by the time Harrisburg had forwarded it back to the Government Services Center in Chester County, the deadline had expired, which meant that these voters simultaneously were and weren't properly registered to vote. I started sending them away because as far as the book said, oh, they need to go to Lancaster to vote. Oh, they need to go to Carlisle to vote. Oh, they need to go to Cherry Hill, New Jersey to vote, which is where their home was. A poll watcher spotted what was going on, and that poll watcher said, wait, judge of elections, why are you turning people away? And I said, well, because I can clearly see, according to the records here, that they're registered somewhere. That somewhere is just not here, so they should go home. That poll watcher conferred with other poll watchers, and they realized because of this registration drive, there was some question about it, and they said, listen, you need to file provisionals for all these people. They instantly persuaded me because that is the right thing to do, and we set up an entire separate table for filling out provisional ballots. Provisional ballots take about 10 minutes to fill out if you don't have practice doing them, and nobody has practice doing them because most years you fill out 0 provisional ballots in the course of an election. And the other JOE is like, yeah, you'll either fill out none or a whole bunch. In that election, we filled out 28 provisional ballots, and the margin of victory for Carolyn Comita, who at that time had been the mayor of Westchester and was running for Pennsylvania House of Representatives seat against the incumbent Dan Truitt. The margin of victory for Carolyn Comita after 2 recounts was 25 votes. The margin of victory for someone to get into the Pennsylvania House of Representatives was 25 votes, and 28 provisionals had been filed from that one precinct alone. The reason those provisionals were filed is A, because the voter, the poll watcher said, hey, you need to do that. B, because I had the bandwidth to do it. And C, because my election workers were well trained enough and prepared enough during the day that we were able to fill out those provisionals before the college students lost interest and went away. Because if you make a college student wait more than 5 minutes with the cafeteria right next door, they'll just kind of sort of evaporate and go away. Every precinct has a different challenge when it comes to voting. On that year, on that time, on that day, the challenge was to get provisionals filed fast enough so that all the college students who were able to file ballots were, and then all of those ballots were accepted by a judge. And it turned the election. Now Carolyn Comita is running for PA Senate. This is a classic bench kind of thing where she's running for PA Senate now. If she gets into PA Senate, she'll take the next step after that. And it comes down to one judge of elections work on one precinct in one place. Now, a lot of things went right in that story. The idea is that service design for voting is not about we're going to be talking about is not about things at the national level. We're not going to be talking about things at the state level. We're going to be talking about voting at the local level, where almost all of voting is actually conducted. Now, here's the thing that's coming up in 2020 that we're all thinking about. This infographic here is 2 days old. It shows that in Chester County, so far, 147,000 mail-in ballots were requested, 142,000 were requested, 36,000 have been returned. By the time November 3rd rolls around, will the number of ballots returned be more equal to the number of ballots requested, or will 120,000 people show up their mail-in ballot in hand asking for that ballot to be spoiled and be voting in person, which is about a 1-minute process? Or will they show up with only some of their ballot, but not the rest of their ballot in hand, which means we need to have them vote provisional possibly, which is a 10-minute process. And how can you be ready for that? Well, by 7:15 a.m. on Monday, we're going to know how that goes. We're going to know what the challenge of the day is. The problem might not be mail-in ballots that want to be spoiled. The challenge might be something completely different. What we're going to talk about is how to use service design to figure out and respond to the gaps and challenges for the local voters coming in and doing stuff. So Dan, I'm going to toss this over to you to talk about what is service design.
Great, thanks, John. So we wanted to be clear on what is service design because it's definitely a hot topic right now for the UX professionals who are on this call. I'm sure it's something that you've seen go around a lot with a lot of different definitions. Thankfully, we have some Think colleagues preparing a service design workshop, in fact, and I think that will be, if you're interested in that, I think the link to that will be sent along after this webinar as well. But they've done a lot of foundational work for defining service design here, and so we leveraged a lot of those materials. So when we think about design, very often we're thinking about a product, right? We're thinking about the iPhone, or we're thinking about Nikes, or an app, or a website, right? And you can go ahead to the next slide, John. Sorry, great. And when we talk about a service, we're talking about something that you can't hold in your hands, right? It's intangible. And it's really a collection of touch points, right? When we're talking about a service, it's something that happens over the course of time. It is a mixture of physical interactions, digital, human interactions, all working together to ultimately bring value to a customer. Examples of service design would be like Disney World is a famous example where Disney World is not a product, but it's something that's happening spanning the course of your experience at Disney World. Not right now, but in other times, it is an example of service design. It's an example of a service. A product, by contrast, is really just one touch point. And we can move to the next slide, John. So when we talk about service design, we're talking about a practice that's built towards that service. So service design, I want to contrast with product design here. Service design is really considering the holistic picture of all of those parts and pieces coming together to create that experience, right? It's considering not just the things that I'm holding in my hand as a customer, but all those things in the background that make that possible. So we know that's you know, from any of our places of work, that's all sorts of paperwork or apps or technology, emails that go out to handle and make those touch points possible. And critically, I want to share that we apply service design not for all problems, right? Service design works for a specific things to create experiences that are really a coordination of all those points. It's not something, it doesn't surpass product design. It's not better. It's just solving different problems. And we can go ahead and I'm going to pass it over to John to talk about why service design is a great fit for voting.
Service design is a great fit for voting because everybody owns their piece of the pie and knows a lot about their little piece of the pie, but each piece is just a piece. One thing that shocks people who aren't poll workers is that how many elected positions they are. So people look at the number of people on their ballot and say, oh, I think I'm voting for 10 people. I think I'm voting for 15 people. There's over 600 elected positions in Chester County. That's because a lot of those elected positions are actually themselves poll workers, like judges of elections, like majority and minority inspectors. But because elections are run at the local level, the people at the precinct are really people that are your neighbors, that are right next door. And what's more, as I'm sure you're aware if you've ever worked at the polls, you know that the people right outside the door the greeters are working for the party. Their job is to get the people from their party to vote in a coordinated way. But the moment you step through that door and set in foot inside, now you're in the kingdom of the judge of elections and everybody else is working on a nonpartisan basis, except for the poll watchers who have a whole different set of things. And there's a whole bunch of different people that all have different agendas that theoretically should be working together and usually are working together, but in the sense of they're all in the same place, not that they're necessarily talking to each other. So service design really is great because it can bridge and bring those things together so people can talk. And here's how it's done. Dan.
Great. So we wanted to start with an example of service design of one particular service design artifact that we use pretty consistently, which we call a service design customer experience blueprint or service blueprint. And the point of a service blueprint is to chart the different roles and technology involved in executing that service, right? So if a service is something that happens over a period of time, we're using that blueprint to show all those individual points that make it possible. So if we're talking about a coffee shop experience, right? Someone who is placing an order on their coffee app. So we have our customer touch point at the top, where I'm a customer, the part I'm interacting with is the app. And at the bottom, we're capturing that the app, we're accounting for that process, right? There's something in the background making this happen. And then once that order takes place, that gets submitted through the system and your barista receives that order, right? And then goes through the whole process of making that order. And I made some slow animations here, and then they're placing those orders for pickup. Ultimately, that's where the customer comes back in and picks it up. So, right, you can see here why a service blueprint is really necessary for something like this, because if we charted the customer experience, they place the order, they pick their coffee up, right? That doesn't tell us a whole lot. Whereas if we look, we see all of this other stuff that happens to make that possible. And we divide these touch points into what we call front stage and backstage. And that's really useful for us to think about what the customer has access to and what they're seeing. Because again, we're typically prioritizing that front stage experience. We're thinking about, again, catering towards customer value. We're thinking about what that full customer experience, what they're seeing. But sometimes that backstage is just as important. And so you can flip to the next slide. The reason that we capture the backstage in such detail is because when we're trying to improve those customer touch points at the top, sometimes the solution to them is tucked way, way, way down in the bottom, right? Sometimes small changes to a process on the back end, a process that the customer will never see, will dramatically improve the time that they are actually getting their coffee, for example, in this case. And so we use service design to chart all of those. Because this becomes our source of truth for identifying opportunities, right? Once we have all those roles and technology identified here, it's much easier to say, where do we see places where we can improve this service? And so we're going to show service design in action by applying this framework, this blueprint framework, to voting, right? So this is not meant to be a comprehensive overview of service design. Like I said, that service design workshop that our colleagues have will be fantastic at really introducing you to what it is and how to do it. We're showing kind of like a small samples of this in action, and really how you can apply this as an election worker, as a regular person. To return to John's point at the beginning, voting is really a local service, right? You could have a whole other version of this webinar that is service design for voting, all capital letters, and it's this humongous blueprint of the whole voting process from registration on to counting of votes. And if you imagine that as this really big layer cake of all these roles and technology, what we're going to do today is like take 2 slices of that layer cake, and we're going to deconstruct that a little bit and talk about how that service mindset has helped to make some real decisions. So when we say a service design mindset for the course of this, we're talking about articulating the people and the technologies involved. So charting out all of those people on the blueprint, identifying opportunities on that blueprint, places where we think that we can improve that customer experience, and then ultimately how you can create solutions and test those solutions in terms of your customer. Everything here is going to be returning to our customer, which is in this case, a voter. So when we take our first problem and we say, just where do I vote, right? This very basic problem that I imagine a lot of us have experienced before. And I'm gonna kind of show that the blueprint for when we say, where do I vote? And I go to my voter services and I say, how do I care about, how do I learn about where do I vote? That journey for them starts at arriving at the table, right? It just starts right there. You're at the table where someone asks for your name. You give that name. That your poll worker verifies your identity. They give you the poll book to sign. You sign the poll book, and then they instruct you on the voting procedure. Right? It's kind of this very straightforward process. We have poll watchers there watching throughout. And really interestingly with this process, if we look at our front stage, backstage line, it's actually much lower, right? Whereas in the coffee shop example, we just had that, the customer experience is place an order, pick up coffee. Here, everything is necessarily on the front stage, right? You can see most of this happening right in front of you. And that is for security, right? Like it is your right to see all of this. It's the right for poll watchers to make sure everything is moving as it should, within certain rules. There's many rules. So we have this point. I arrive at the table, I give my identity, I go vote, right? But John's going to talk about why that it's not always that simple, right? We don't always care about that.
That's right. And so for fellow judges of elections in this room, you know that what you get in your supply box, if you're in Chester County, is you get 1 or 2 little lawn signs that say vote here, and that's it. Theoretically, a couple of weeks ago, the voter has received a little postcard saying, remember, you're registered to vote at the church or the fire station or whatever. Now, of course, in COVID times, here's the grid that was sent out by Chester County yesterday. Every yellow line here is a precinct that has moved in the past week or so. So for folks that usually vote in the Phoenixville Public Library, well, on November 3rd, you're going to be voting in the Civic Center. For people that usually vote in the Pecopson home, you're going to be voting at Pecopson Elementary. So the question of where do I vote is actually very different for a number of people, and they're going to get a small discrete postcard from voter services. There's a lot of reasons why that happens, especially in a year like this one, but it's not just about the items, the precincts moving around as well. The other judges of elections here, when people come to the church, well, should you vote in the front door of the church or should you vote in the back door of the church? Oh, I'm at the fire station. Are you at the left door of the fire station or are you at the right door of the fire station? At Conestoga, are you precinct 645, 620, 618, or 635? And it depends on whether you're going in the gym door or the other door. Vote here is actually vote where? There's a million places. And of course, every precinct has a nice line out here that says vote here, but not really. It just means for a couple of people. And so what I wanted to do for my precincts is to think about designing the service for the voter, starting with when they get in the car to figure out where the polling place is. In order to do that, we needed to do a couple of things. One, we had to recruit the committee people. As a judge of elections, theoretically, I don't need to talk to the Democratic Party of Chester County. Theoretically, I don't need to talk to the Republican Party of Chester County. But if I want everyone to know where they're going, I'm going to need their help to tell the voters, to reinforce that message that was just that one tiny little postcard that they got from places. Plus, that tiny little postcard only says Conestoga. It does not say which of the 2 doors they need to go into in Conestoga. And what's more, it does not say which of the 3 lines they need to get in once they get in the front door. So we did a service design workshop here at Think, and we figured that out. We wrote the service blueprint down, and we realized that in this case, colors might be the best thing to do. So we wrote down all the pieces of information that every voter might individually know. For some reason, some voters know that they're precinct 620. Some voters know that they are Tredyffrin Middle 7. Some voters know that they usually vote in the Conestoga gym. For some bizarre reason, nobody ever knows more than one of those things, but everyone knows at least one of those things unless they're a first-time voter. So here I recruited Jean Cook, who is everybody's algebra teacher. Literally everybody's algebra teacher. Jean from precinct 645, you walked in, she has taught you algebra, and she stops you at the front door from behind her plexiglass shield here and says, where do you usually vote? And people will wander in and they say, well, I usually vote in the country club. And she says, great, go to the orange table. And so we take them and we move them in there. That is all a part of the service that happens before what is listed in the Judge of Elections election procedure manual, but was teased out because we were like, right, voting does not start when they get to the check-in tables pictured on the right. Voting starts when they go to the car to figure out where the parking is, to figure out which door to go into, to figure out which of the line. And we work together with everybody, including the greeters outside, including Jean Cook here at the front of the door, including the people at the tables who knew what to expect. So we solved that by just asking our questions about like, great, what do people know? There's a question, how do we find out what the voters know? Surveys? Yeah, just by talking to them. And because, 15 minutes worth of sampling of voters, you already know the general vibe of the things. So let's talk about the second example now, Dan. I'm going to throw it over back to you, and we're going to talk about the other challenge of how do I vote? So we've solved the question of like getting people out of the parking lot and into the right door and getting to the right color-coded table. So what happens next?
Right. So from our manual, right, we give them, from our election worker manual, we give them their instructions. We tell them how to vote. And then we can flip over to our continuation of our blueprint, right? As a poll worker, I've instructed them on the voting procedure. That voter then goes to the polling booth. Sorry, I have cat hair swirling all around me. They go to the voting booth. They mark their ballot in some way, whether that's physical or electronic. They submit that ballot, and this is where poll workers know whether that's a machine operator or if people are kind of flexing around a little bit, everyone is sort of helping to answer questions around that ballot. They submit that ballot, and then ultimately machines, if we kind of look at our back end here, machines are providing that vote count. And then ultimately, the poll workers are providing that vote count to the county. And we also know that there's so much more that happens than just this like kind of perfectly clean blueprint here. As a poll worker, myself as an election worker, the chart actually would be impossible to create the real blueprint of like all of those little interactions and touch points. And John's gonna kind of take us into some of those challenges now.
Great. So back to 2016, when I've got Westchester University students checking in. For the coffee shop metaphor, 4 out of 5 people are ordering a drip coffee that takes 2 seconds to prepare. These are the voters that come in, they say their name is present in the book, they get their ballot, they go, they cast their ballot, they're done. The 5th person is someone whose name doesn't appear in the book. At that time, I had a check-in clerk named Tony Shimoni, a cantankerous real estate agent that everybody knew in Chester County, and that could terrify a gargoyle because he had a lovable, crotchety demeanor, and the kids would come up and they'd give their name, and Tony would look up from the book and says, "You're not in the book." And it seriously was like he was trying to imitate Popeye. And the kids would recoil and they'd be scared and they'd try to figure out, and we'd say, "Tony, work with the kids." And he was trying to work with the kids and he was saying it with love, but really what was happening, there was a record scratch moment where those kids were not in the book, and he just by going there, he'd say like, "You're not in the book. You're all done. You got to figure that out." So we created a separate line for those kids that weren't in there. And the other judges of elections in here will know, I bet the county suggests a lot about how you just run multiple lines. If the crowd is too big to run 2 lines, try running 4 lines. If the crowd is super big, run 8 lines. But really, it's not necessarily about the size of the line, I found. It's about separating the people ordering drip coffee from the people ordering a highly complex iced drink with lots of customizations. And in this slightly strained metaphor, somebody ordering a complex drink is someone who doesn't appear in the book that may or may not be registered in this precinct. This year, it's going to be someone who's in the book who says that they have requested a mail-in ballot, but they haven't received it. Or they've requested a mail-in ballot and they have some of it. Or they've requested a mail-in ballot and they have all of it, but they have some questions before they spoil it. It is about figuring out what to do and speeding up so that all the people who want drip coffee can get in and get their drip coffee and get out so that you have a short line. Because that is the difference between a 20-minute line and a 3-hour line, is getting all the people who have something simple to do something simple. One of the ways we did that at Think Company is we made an app. The app we made was an app that'll take pictures of driver's license and automatically submit the driver's license picture to the same Department of State website that everybody uses to find out where people are registered. It doesn't do anything new that wasn't already available. It just does it faster. And the way we did that is so that I, as a judge of elections, could take someone aside and say, "Oh, let's figure out where you're registered to vote." Okay, I see that you actually should be over at the lobby at Conestoga instead of in here. And then we could start doing that with people in line instead of people that had waited in line for time to just move people up and get them going faster. Other things we did is by working together again with the greeters, with the parties, and with other people. So instead of just having the person outside the poll say, "You need a sample ballot? You need a sample ballot?" Having people ask questions like, "Hey, are you a first-time voter? Hey, do you know if you're in the right precinct or not?" And so those people who want to just stomp right in can start stomping right in. And those people who are a little bit unsure can get straightened out by having a 5-minute one-on-one conversation before they're at the front of the table. Again, the reason this is a big deal coming up is that only 36,000 out of as of yesterday of the 140,000 mail-in ballots requested have come back. Does that mean we're going to have lots of high-touch voters on election day? Possibly. How are we going to be ready for it? Well, by figuring carefully the interaction between all the people. Dan, I think I talked over you a moment ago.
No, I was just going to add from my experience as well. And when you said like the lines, right? We have 3 lines. They're all moving very quickly. I think that's an example when we're talking about service design of sort of that adverse reaction of creating when instead of building for a service, you're building like for a product, right? If I'm sitting there in my head saying I'm optimizing for a number of lines, that starts to break down because it's not actually solving a problem. It's not focused on that customer experience. It's not taking into account all of those different processes that need to take place. For example, at when I was in Montgomery County, we rolled out the paper process within the past few years. And we had these, like you see this in the picture here, the little like privacy folder forts basically for you to fill out your ballot in peace. And instead of being in a nice gym, we were in a home ec room. Like there were ovens all over the place. And so, we were speeding through our line, but we had people sitting on top of each other, literally like right up next to an oven, trying to fill in their vote secretly, right? And so while it gave the illusion of moving faster, we just had this backup of everyone waiting at the scanning machine kind of crouched in a blob in front of the big scanner where you could actually submit your vote. So there's all this stuff that like you think you're optimizing, but if you're only looking at one little thread, and in this case, I'm looking at lines, right? I'm not actually making a better experience. I'm just shifting the problem somewhere else. There's probably many, many stories like that from the election workers here as well. So as we're getting towards the end of time, and we want to make sure to leave a lot of time for Q&A here, I want to think about those, how we actually put service design into action. We gave such a small tidbit today, but if you can kind of take away for those UX practitioners or those people who want to use this mindset and kind of take it into their daily life, their workplace, or civic services, really important to understand the difference between a product and a service, right? A product is something I'm optimizing for this, for one piece, one experience, whereas a service, I'm optimizing for that coordination between people, process, and technology, right? I'm considering that holistic picture of how those work together to meet a particular end. And always, 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 in terms of the second bullet, I'm considering my audience and centering their experience, right? We can get really bogged down in the details of our service, right? We can get really bogged down in all of the handoffs that have to happen in the process. But that audience is the central part. From John's example, when they were considering, not just after they crossed the threshold into the voting precinct, they were considering from the moment they decide where to drive to. They were considering the moment they step out of the car and the first people they see. They were centering the audience instead of centering the process. And when you really want to put that service design to work for you, really focus on articulating all of those people and technologies that make up that service. Chart it out. It doesn't have to be super formal, it doesn't have to be beautiful, but really spend time to chart out all of those people and processes and technologies that are working for you in your small example. And think about opportunities in terms of customer touchpoints. How can you make this touchpoint better? Even if it's a process that's way down in your blueprint, always kind of take it back and think about it in terms of those customer touchpoints.
So here's my takeaway for this. Everyone in this room can be the most important part of the election process for voters. The reason I showed how small Tredyffrin 645 is because your polling place, and I bet you've been there before, your polling place is 5 or 6 people and your precinct is a 7-block radius. And if you are a UX designer, you're probably going to be the only person with a UX mindset on that team of people figuring stuff out. And that is huge. And just by having the mindset of like, your goal is to follow the rules of the election, there's no question about that, but your role is also to keep the lines short by finding ways to think about the whole voter experience and work holistically with the other people around to figure out how you can all solve that together. That is the difference between a 3-hour line and a 20-minute or a 5-minute line. And you absolutely can be the person to implement that. You can get in contact. Now, many of you have probably sent the email in or filled out the national thing saying, hey, I'd like to be a poll worker. And what you've heard back is possibly nothing. And the reason you've heard back possibly nothing is that your county election worker, volunteer person has been getting daily batch spreadsheets of thousands of people every day, and they're just handing them out to the judges of elections. And the judges of elections are a little bit overwhelmed because the judges of elections have small teams of people that they know pretty well and they're pretty used to. And now they're getting lots of just like names and numbers thrown at them. And some are the try-hard kind of JOE that says like, okay, let's do this, and they call everybody on the list. And some of the JOEs are just like, it's fine, we'll probably handle it. But you know what? You can get in touch with your local judge of elections by calling your committee people, your Democratic committee person or your Republican committee person, looking up who they are, giving them a call and say, hey, how can I help? And that person might say, well, you can help by being a poll watcher, which is true. They might say, well, you can help by being a greeter, which is also true. But you can also say, hey, what's the name of our local judge of elections? And then you can get in touch with that person directly and say, hey, I'd really like to help. How can I help? And then, because we're going to start talking about the questions, somebody said, what can you do to get ready for this? It's really nuts and boltsy, and you can talk to your judge of elections. Buy a big box of Sharpies. I'm not kidding. Buy a big box of Sharpies. You can make sure that you have envelope moisteners. Also not kidding. You can't lick an envelope through a mask. You can talk to the rest of the people and just start thinking about what the issues are so that you're ready. Again, we're going to find out what the big challenges of the day. By 7:15 a.m. on Tuesday, November 3rd, we're going to be like, oh, this day is going to be all about And if you've thought carefully ahead of time about what you might be able to do, or different ways in which you can groom the line of people so that the people who are straightforward and know what they're doing can go straight through, and you have the bandwidth to talk to other people, you will be well set up to have a shorter line on election day. And I can provide, and Dan and I can both provide resources. We love Googling local county websites to find out what the turnout was at your precinct, so we'd be happy to help with that. So that ends the prepared part of the service design for voting, and we are delighted to talk about questions. Phil, should we wait for you to present questions? Should we grab them out of the Q&A? How would you like to do it?
Well, I think I'm the only one who can unmute people. We have at least one person who's identified that I think you know. Oh, we have a few other folks in here too. So I'll go to the anonymous questions last, and just give the folks who've identified and who you may want to talk to some time. So the first question you started to answer, John, but I'm gonna still unmute Patrice and let the two of you converse a little bit. So Patrice, you should be live if you unmute your mic, and you can talk to John and Dan.
Great. Hi. Thanks. I'm really happy that you guys are doing this because I'm so worried about how this is going to go this year, especially with people who I think are going to be trying to expose the flaws in this system. I'm judge of elections, Bucks County. I haven't gotten anything with any kind of, information about who is going to be there. I do know some of the poll workers, but they're like long timers who just always do it. I don't really know about anyone that I can contact ahead of time. Are there things that I can do day of that will help? I mean, you kind of went over this already by saying you should have Sharpies and you should have, envelope moisteners, which I would have never thought of, so thank you. Is there anything else that someone like me can do when I have limited information and I will try to get more information, but might not get any more information that I could use to day of just keep things moving?
Dan, I'm going to take this one. Do you mind? Patrice, did you say you're a new judge of elections?
I am. I was majority whatever
Inspector.
Inspector last year. And my father-in-law was judge of elections, but he can't work this year because he's immunocompromised.
Yes.
I think he might possibly still be getting all of the information that I'm supposed to be getting. But yes, I'm a new judge of elections.
That's probably the case. We are going to take this offline. If you were Chester County, I would already have a wheelbarrow full of information to dump on you. But we're going to connect and find another Bucks County judge of elections to talk to you, and they will dump the wheelbarrow full of information on you. And we're going to get you in touch with the Bucks County coordinator, and either they will have it all or we will bite their ankles until they give it to you. Because yes, there's a bunch of stuff that you should have. Connecting with other judge of elections will help a lot. Getting together with your staff and just calling your staff ahead of time. 4 or 5 people in this room are people who are working my precinct. But I was just like, hey, come to this and we'll talk about it. And then this evening we're going to get on a Zoom call and we're just going to all talk to each other. And just talking to the people and getting in touch with them and calling your committee people will help. So make sure you do what it takes to follow up. I'll put you in touch with other Bucks County poll workers we can find. Was that a helpful answer?
Yes, it was. Thank you so much.
Cool.
Thank you so much, Patrice, for your question. Now I'm gonna unmute you. Sorry, this takes a little bit of time here. And I'm gonna move to, we have Riva. I apologize if I'm mispronouncing your name, but I think we have Riva. I'm going to unmute you, and you should be unmuted now.
Great, thank you so much for taking my question. And hey, John. The question I have is, even in the last few days, we've been chatting locally, and there's been some good ideas that have come up. How many of these ideas and best practices get shared? Because it feels like everybody keeps reinventing the wheel all over the place, right?
Dan, you want to? How much coordination have you seen across precincts?
None. I would love to hear your answer to this. from my scope, that doesn't mean it wasn't happening. It just means that I wasn't privy to it.
Yeah. Riva, Chester County has that. You might have attended the JOE forum in Chester County.
I did.
Yeah, that was it. You're looking at it. That's the judges of elections get in a room and we all boast to see who fed their poll workers the best. The answer is there's a very low degree of coordination between precincts to do this stuff. There's the county provided training, but then election workers don't really have a grassroots network to share best practices, and we're trying to change that. So you're in on the ground floor. We can do this together.
That's great, because so much of it is like almost like hacks, right? That they make such a big difference. Even your color coding, all of those things. So many others could benefit. They just haven't thought about it yet. So thank you.
Well, thank you for your question, Riva. And I'm going to unmute, or I'm going to put you back on mute. But again, if you have other questions, please feel free to jump in. The next person is Caroline. And I'm going to bring Caroline up. And Caroline, you're, maybe I missed your button. There you are. If you feel like asking your question, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. And I wanted to just mention that if there are any poll workers who are in Philadelphia County, there is a poll worker caucus that has been formed through Committee of 70. So, and that's new this year, and it's been a really wonderful resource.
Caroline, if you have any information on that, like, a link or something that you want us to share, please feel free to share it in chat, and we'll make sure it goes out in the email that we follow up with as well.
I will, for sure. But I wanted to ask you, I'm a committee person in South Philly, and we have one polling place with 3 divisions. And we've been thinking about line control and signage and greeters and all that, but I hadn't thought before about dividing voters into low touch and high touch, like the people who are coming to spoil their ballots in one line and everybody else in the other line. Can you talk a little bit more about how you do that and what that looks like?
Sure. In the past, grooming the line has really been more about finding people that are in the wrong place and getting them out, or getting them to the right place, so that someone doesn't spend 20 minutes in line only to find out they have to go wait in a different line. It's really about just like getting them to the right place quickly. Okay. Posting signs we've tried posting signs, and for me, it never seemed to work because people have sign blindness. There's so many of them. We had great results with literally putting a sandwich board on a person with a big map on it, a big color-coded map, and just having that person walk up and down the line like a dork, and like, hey, you're in the right place. And then people would kind of look at that. I don't know if Philadelphia County hands out street lists and walk lists in your packet. That is to say, the list of people that are allocated to this precinct. But that's commonly what I'll put on a clipboard and give to people to walk up and down the line saying, hey, would you like to make sure you're in the right place? The challenge is that everyone thinks they're in the right place, even if they aren't. Right. But, somewhat. Okay. The other challenge is that people want to ignore the greeters at the table because they know that they're greeters and say, hey, do you want a sample ballot? And people are just like, right. And so trying to do it once they're past the gauntlet of the greeters can help. And giving someone a literal beauty pageant sash that says election official can help, because they know that it's, they're talking to a poll worker and not somebody else. Okay. Dan, any other thoughts about that?
Yeah, I was thinking like props too, like bringing in, like holding up, or like some facsimile of a mail-in ballot and saying like, if you have one of these and want to figure out what you're doing, come talk to me or something. Just like, don't do signs, but something physical, I think.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
John, I'd like to, I hit done on someone's question. I didn't mean to. I'll have to look that up. But I'd like to ask a follow-up question to that, because I am not an election. I'm not a poll worker, but I've always been, I'm very proud to say I've always been in one of the first 5 people to vote in my precinct for big elections. And I see a lot of activity going on there. And I've also noticed in my precinct that there's there are poll observers who seem to be helpful, and I'm just wondering, are they like, what? Can you talk a little about the difference between those folks and how they're directed and how you're directed, and what it may look like in the in this upcoming election?
Sure. Very briefly, a poll watcher or a poll observer, essentially the same thing, is somebody who has been issued a certificate by the county and is permitted to be inside the precinct to make sure that there's no shenanigans. Anyone who does not have a certificate is not a poll watcher or a poll observer. They're somebody outside the polling place. They're in an unofficial capacity no matter what they're doing. The role of a poll watcher or a poll observer who has a certificate and is inside the precinct is to watch. They may come up to, but no closer than 6 feet away from the voting materials in Chester County. They must not interact with the voters. They must not touch the voting materials. They must do nothing except pretty much sit there and keep an eye on us and then ask questions if anything seems bad. So their role is actually quite limited in scope, though it's important.
Because I remember once in Philadelphia, the poll worker asked me if I had ID, and I said, I'm not required to provide ID in Pennsylvania. And the observer, who did stay a safe distance away, was sort of shouting across the empty room because it was 7 o'clock in the morning or whatever, and said, they're allowed to ask, but you don't have to provide it. And that was, and I was like, who's that? What's going on over there? And they said, he's just an observer. And then I went into the booth and voted. So that's all kind of that's okay for that kind of interaction to go on.
Yes, the role of the observer is also, they're being useful if they sort of are a gadfly and speaking up. Incidentally, that exact rule, as I'm sure you know, is no longer the case. We no longer ask unless, well, in Chester County, unless the poll book specifically says ID required, indicating that the voter is voting for the first time at this precinct. That's the one and only time that we will ask for ID. I have been in places where the poll workers have been asking for ID too much, and the poll workers and the poll watcher has said like, and the judge of elections usually like, what? Because the judges of elections are not often up on this year's rules. And so everyone in this room who is not a judge of elections, you may very well know more about the election than the judge of elections, who might be into it because they're an extrovert and they like seeing everybody twice a year. And you're playing an important role by reminding them what the deal is.
Okay, great. Well, so thank you. I thank you, Caroline. I forgot to disable your talking, but thank you for your question. I'm going to go back into the list of questions here and see if there's any open questions. Patrice's is still there. I think everything else is asked by anonymous folks. So I'm going to ask the first one, which I inadvertently put in the answered column. But this anonymous question is: I know we're talking on a local level, but out of curiosity, why do you think the lines are so long in Georgia? Any thoughts?
Dan, I'm going to take this unless you want to.
Go for it.
Georgia is a good example in my mind. This isn't quite so much of a nuanced service design thing. It's just a question of numbers. A county of 3 million people with one location with a high touch process. I'm pretty sure that what's happening in Georgia is the sort of soup to nuts, fill out, receive, complete, return. So I think it's a fairly high touch thing. And I think there it is just a matter of number of people who want to do it and the amount of resources, i.e. not enough, that have been allocated to make it happen. Now, here is my own opinion about things like that. Voter fraud is not a thing. Part of the reason why elections are so grassroots is because when you walk into that cafetorium at your local high school, you see people that live within 3/4 of a mile of you, and everyone knows what the deal is. It would be ridiculous for a bus to pull up and for a whole busload of strangers to get out. That just does not happen. And the whole way it's set up, that you're voting with people that you know, that is the deal. That's why elections are the way they are. Voter suppression is very real. And this is very important for service design too, because voter suppression happens by changing bureaucratic details in such a way that it makes it incrementally harder to vote. Sometimes we see that when it results in big catastrophic problems like 11-hour lines, but sometimes it results in little bitty problems like, for instance, a batch of new voter registrations arriving at the Government Services Center just 12 hours too late. Or some other bureaucratic process not quite being followed, or making it incrementally harder to fill out something. And so when you're taking a service design approach, it is a really great framework for identifying the gaps and friction between parts of the process that wouldn't necessarily be as apparent if you were just looking at one part at a time.
Yeah,
So, Oh, go Dan, please.
Yeah, I'll add to that is that I think like this is why especially for the UX professionals on this call, when we talk about service design, why it's really important that we're always documenting the goals of each track of those things, right? Because that helps us say this is this way for a reason. And I think when those sort of like the people who are working towards disenfranchisement of voters are able to go in and exploit able to make those tweaks like John is talking about to make it not work as well, are able to go in and tweak processes that are not optimized towards the voter experience, not optimized towards a particular goal, right? They're going in and changing things that are like somewhat arbitrary to ultimately nefarious means, and they can do it because it's not a system that is resilient, right? It's not actually built to withstand those changes very well.
This seems like a really interesting service design challenge just nationwide, because we've it's tradition, it's history in this country that elections are a very local thing. I know I forget which county it is, but there's some county on the East Coast where everyone wakes up at the crack of dawn and walks into a room together and they all sort of verbalize their vote to each other or something. I forget what it is, what town that is, but that's just because locally they've chosen that that's the voting method, right? And so how do you, and I know I'm interjecting my own question here, but I really want an answer to this. How do you think we manage the service design around something that is so federated across multiple groups with different different skill sets, different generations? I know I registered to be a poll worker in my area, and I didn't get a call back because there's a lot of poll workers in Philadelphia, but I did mostly because everyone who works the polls in my neighborhood is quite old and seems to be infirmed, and I wanted to make sure that they were safe. But anyway, that's a whole different story. Like how do we approach this from a service design perspective when it is so disparate and up to the locals?
I think one great example is the Guild that we just saw. 70 is fantastic. By the way, 70.org, the word 70.org, you can go there. We need more guilds. We need more JOEs to talk to each other. And so, yeah, I think that federation role is great. We've got so much great communication technology like the stuff we have right now. Yeah. It's a great way for information dissemination.
And I also think the federation, the fact that this is kind of like a fractured system, I think is a feature, right? As John was sort of alluding to, like it does make it, like when we talk about like large scale election interference, like they were talking about in 2016, like that's much more difficult because like at this county, everyone's yelling their vote into a megaphone, and at this county, it's using a machine from 1980, right? Like it is somewhat a security feature, sort of. I don't know if it happened that way or was on purpose, but that is sort of a feature of it, but it does make like a sort of national effort to redo this much more difficult.
Yeah, that's interesting. Hey, before I go to the next question, I just got a note that the Pennsylvania's voter status system at this very moment is down. And so I posted a link to our PA Voter Check app. It won't work until the Pennsylvania system comes back up. It'll give inconclusive results. So if you're following that link, it will work eventually. Right now it's not working, but please keep your hands on it and try it out as things like that work. So let me go to another question. Are electronic machines or paper ballots better, in quotation marks? Are there service design considerations for either method?
I'd love to talk about this. Dan, do you mind?
Sure.
I love paper, and here's why. I've been involved in 2 recounts. The first one, the one that I just talked about, where Carolyn Comita, won by 24 votes. And those provisionals were paper provisionals. They could have been electronic too, but I love the safety about it. The other recount I was involved in was my mother-in-law, Barb McIlvaine Smith, was the House of Representative electee that turned the PA House from Republican to Democrat in 2000. The exact year I've forgotten. That also was a contested recount. And there is something so wonderful about just being able to take stacks of paper and move the stacks of paper from column 1 to column B with a R lawyer and a D lawyer standing there and harumphing and everyone able to see what is going on. That is why I love paper. Also, as a technologist, I love paper extra because you can recreate everything, even if you can just recount. So I personally really like using electronic machines, if necessary, to mark the ballot, and then having a human just be able to like, yup, that's my vote, and then stick it into my favorite machine, the Election Systems and Services DS200 optical scanner and tabulator machine, which counts everything so you get it the same day. But then in the bottom, there's all those ballots available for you to count, recount, shuffle, reshuffle, look at, have arguments about over and over again. Dan, what are your thoughts?
I think that there's like, I mean, I don't disagree with anything you said. I know that I think Pennsylvania does require now some kind of paper backup to votes in the state of Pennsylvania. But I think like there's something really interesting in this question about like better, right? And they correctly scare quoted it, which is like familiarity is a really big thing here, especially for people who've been voting the same way for decades. We had the precinct I worked in was older, and when we switched to the paper from those terrible machines from the 80s that always failed, there was a lot of frustration around it because they were like, we knew how to use this thing. I was there when they used it. They did not know how to use that thing, right? They did not know how to use the old machine, right? But they learned how to use it over time, and in their head, they didn't like this change. They were resistant to this change. And so the old thing was better, right? Even though there were all sorts of problems with the old machines. So I think when we're talking about this, especially as like a design challenge, there's a lot of familiarity and just habit patterns that are built into this that we have to think about, and like change management, right? Like Montgomery County, from where I worked in, they tried to roll out their paper system as early as possible so that they could get a couple election runs in so people could see it before this particular election. The same thing at Philadelphia, I think what didn't do it as soon before, but they still tried to. I think they had the new machines for the primary. Is that correct, Phil? I think was my answer.
Oh.
Is that right? They had. I think for the past 2 elections they've had the electronic machines, right? In Philly,
I think so.
Caroline
Okay,
Tiger
great.
says yes.
Oh, Karen.
Yes.
Yes,
Okay,
great.
that's good. Yeah.
So yeah, I think that when we're talking about it as a design challenge, and the second part of this question, are there service design considerations for either method? Yes, absolutely. And I think I remember when we first did the paper ballots in my precinct, we spent the whole time as election workers thinking about how can they improve this. We sent feedback to the county in a document at the end, and they have made those changes, right? Like, you know, we had privacy envelopes, we had considerations about bleed through, like there's all sorts of like experimentation. And I think if you take that upon yourselves as a precinct or even as a voter to give feedback in a really constructive way, because trust me, as an election worker, we get feedback, nothing but feedback the entire day. So if you can provide that as kindly as possible, that would be much appreciated, but absolutely considered.
I think. Please, John, you go. I'm supposed to be facilitating, not talking.
I'd like to call on Riva, and Riva brought up was a really good example of, hey, I think here's something that we can do better with our paper ballots. Riva, are you willing to go in and talk about your challenges with the disinfecting the laminated ballots and your thoughts about it? Phil, are you able to?
You want me to unmute Riva?
Unmute Riva, that would be great.
I'm gonna mute her and see if she's willing to answer your question. Hold on one second.
A reverse webinar where we call on the audience.
Right. Riva, you're back. John has a question for you.
Wonderful. Yeah, I did hear John's question. So yeah, to summarize really briefly, right, during the primary when I was working with John, we were trying to keep, of course, everybody safe, and we had these laminated privacy folders that we put the ballot in that we hand to the voter, and we had to spray each of those folders down between users. And so it's sort of this industrial grade sanitizer thing that comes in a spray bottle, and it takes a long time to dry. And we didn't have a lot of people working the polls. And so, you know, somebody would bring in and dump a batch of them. And when you got a minute, you sprayed them down and you stacked them up and you hope they aired right before the next person came in. But they stayed kind of sticky. And so the whole process in terms of the number of folders, the fact that they were reusable, the fact that this thing didn't dry very quickly, and you're trying to keep everybody safe, just created like a bottleneck, right? So that was the experience from Ben. So John, I'll stop there.
Oh yeah, so what are we gonna try, Reva?
So what are we going to do? We were brainstorming in our group, and I give John a lot of credit for this idea too, right? So we're thinking, how can we prevent this bottleneck? And so one of the ways you can do it is to make things disposable, but it's hard to make all the folders disposable because they're expensive. So John's idea was to get this really big roll of craft paper, and we cut it up, and so it covers the ballot, which is what it's supposed to do. But you can have a nice recycling bin right next to it. People use it, and they throw the wrapper away. So it's going to cost us about $33 to get enough paper wrappers made. It just means somebody with a couple of pairs of scissors or a couple of people with pairs of scissors to cut it up. But if that works, that'll be a much easier option.
That's great. What about a box of gloves so that they can put on the gloves and handle them themselves? And stuff like that might help out too.
It certainly could. And everyone in this room, thank you, Reva, very much.
Thank you.
And everyone in this room, that's exactly the kind of thing that when you get involved in your local election board, you know, like, yeah, you can try some stuff because every precinct has its own challenges. And so like the point is like, yeah, figuring out what the challenges are at your precinct will be an awesome way to do it. Okay,
Yeah.
Phil, back over to you for more questions.
No, I mean something else that I wanted to mention about when we were talking when Dan was doing his presentation on service design and how we build service blueprints and look at things like front of the house, back of the house kind of stuff. Like one of the things that I think a lot of people don't really think about, and when we talk about paper ballots, I think that fits in well, is that recounts and the reason why we need some sort of a paper record is really a back of the house process that the vast majority of the American public aren't involved with at all, but are extremely interested in when it comes time for that. So we all, probably have memories or, can look back at the historical record of that famous guy looking at the hanging Chad with his crossed eyes, back in the 2000 election. And that's all part of the service design of voting. It just happens behind the scenes and we don't really pay attention to those things until it becomes a big issue.
Yeah, I think that also brings up something that I found when getting a lot of this feedback from the voters is to have an answer to those things, right? Like, why did we switch to paper ballots? Well, Pennsylvania mandated it, and it's so that we have an audit trail, right, to prevent any issues around, prevent any controversies and things like that. It's something the state decided. So as election workers, and maybe if my JOE was like, more experience, but like John said, maybe not 100% up to date on current procedures. Like, take it upon yourself to look up things and try to understand why they happen, because being able to explain that to a voter is also part of the process, and it makes the answer easier than like, cause. Yeah, like, why do we have to do it on paper? Cause I don't know, because they told us to, is like not satisfying for a voter.
It's not satisfying for anyone who's experiencing or witnessing the back of the house events. And I can say, not just from an election standpoint, as a leader in an organization and someone who's done a lot of service design work for our clients, as both of you have, like if you're building an employee system and an employee comes to someone in HR and says, why do we do this way? And the answer is just cause. Many of us have encountered that in our lives, and just cause is not an acceptable answer. There really needs to be whether it's a good reason or not. You can say, well, the idiots over in Harrisburg decided we have to do it this way, and here's the problem they're trying to solve. At least that helps out. Okay, the last question we have from Anonymous is, as a first-time voter, what are the most important things I should remember to bring with me? So first of all, whoever wrote this question, thank you for coming to vote. Whether it's because you've aged in and you're a first-time voter, or you finally decided that it's time to come in and vote, congratulations. And now John and Dan can help answer that question for you.
Well, come prepared to have a fuss made over you, because that's the fun thing that we do. First-time voters, it's great. We love it. It's wonderful. Don't forget to mention it. So that all the election workers, who can just, yay, that's fantastic. And if they don't, that's a shame. And let us know and we will make a fuss over you. Bring a form of photo ID. Driver's license is fine. Passport, if that's what you've got. Any form of photo ID in Chester County, and I think in other places, you will be required to show photo ID if it is the first time you are voting in that precinct, and you will not be required to show photo ID subsequently. The paper registration card that you got in the mail does count as ID, even though it doesn't have your photo on it. So if you have that paper registration card, great, bring it. Just bring a driver's license, bring something like that. That should be it. And I assume you know exactly where to go, but if you don't know exactly and precisely where to go, get in touch with us and we'll be there.
And I'll add to this, like in general, the abstract out from this one level is Google your county election board and their rules, for not for this specifically, but for all things. I and John and I were talking about this as we were prepping for this webinar, but we've seen a lot of advice that's like, for your Pennsylvania state ballot, do this, whatever. That's really generalized, and unfortunately, like that advice doesn't always hold, right? Like I saw something on Twitter that was like, be sure to use a black pen, nothing else will work. And that's not true. Some of the counties you can use a Sharpie or a blue pen. I think in Philadelphia, I think it says you can use a blue pen, in fact. But so I think the encourage people where you can to look up the rules for their county because it's county specific. I think that's a better message than sort of scaring people about the rules that might not even apply to them.
Great advice. I noticed there were more questions. I just forgot how to scroll. So Victoria asked a question. I'm going to actually see if she's still with us. I can. What a terrible way to put it. If she's still online, I'm going to allow her to talk and ask her question because it's an interesting question. Victoria, I've unmuted you.
Hi. Yeah, I was responding to a question that was further up about like the quote advantages of running locally, but and it was something I was thinking about in the context of like mapping out the service design of something that has so many like divergent points depending on what state you are, what county you are. But I mean, it seems that a lot of the inequities that are a result of our voting system are because each place gets to decide how to do it. And like the example that I gave was that the Iowa caucuses and like just that, that state decides this is how we do it because we always have, and it's like a very inaccessible process.
Yeah, actually, I remember reading an article about how inaccessible the Iowa caucuses are, and thinking about that originally as like, oh, it's this great tradition, it's kind of like very grassrootsy and homey and stuff like that, and then all of a sudden realizing that there's a whole collection of citizens who really can't participate in that caucus because it's about physically moving around in small confined spaces that often have, it's difficult to get into and stuff like that. So I think that's a great question, Victoria. I don't have an answer for it. I just thought I would add flair to her question.
Yeah. As a judge of elections in, umpty-ump old Pennsylvania, where all of our rules are hundreds of years old, and I often will get jealous when I'll compare notes with a judge of elections in Washington State, where they've got fresh new rules that were written in the past 100 years. And so, we've got rules about where people can keep their horses on the books for elections. And those are fun, actually. But yeah, and that's the reason where iwillvote.com, you have to say iwillvote.com/state/PA. It's not iwillvote.com. You have to build one website. If you want to help voters, you have to build 50 websites. And so it absolutely does add a lot of friction. That being said, I keep loving the whole sort of checks and balances approach where, like, on the other hand, it's possible to change things. It's not that hard to get a state legislator to agree with you and to change something. Actually, no, it's hugely hard. But anyway, yeah, I have mixed feelings.
I think I don't have anything to add to that.
Do either of you, this is an opinion question, but do you think it's time at a national level to sort of redefine how we vote to try to make voting more equitable for everyone?
John, believe that it's a national holiday for voting is a slam dunk. Mail-in voting is a slam dunk. Everything else is, details. That's my opinion.
That's great.
Right. One of the things we talked about at the beginning of this was like what we considered to be a successful service, right? For John and I, and that was that every eligible voter is able to vote, right? And I think like that is not a goal that's clearly had by all, and the system definitely doesn't work towards that. So I think I agree with John's suggestions there.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's an interesting challenge that we're all in, because I, like John, the one thing that you pointed out, which every time I hear it, I forget it until I hear it again, is this idea that elections are very local, and it's very difficult for voter fraud to exist there, because essentially you're voting within your own community and you're voting among the people you live with. So that seems to be a protection that's helped us for a long time, except for brand new voters and stuff like that. And obviously voter suppression can still be rolled into that. But at the same time, we're coming upon probably a monumental election. It's probably going to be more. Well, I'm not going to say probably. There will be more mail-in ballots in this election than we've ever seen before. Mm-hmm. At least in the states where mail-in ballots aren't the standard.
Now this is a very interesting topic. Chester County has purchased several Pitney Bowes mail handling machines, which are the same mail handling machines that are used for direct mail and marketing. So if there's UX designers and other folks in here, I dare say if you've ever gotten involved in direct mail, I have. If you've ever gotten involved in direct mail, these are the good old direct mail machines that people are using. Chester County has purchased them, and there's going to be a lot of flow about how they're processed. The difference between a naked ballot and a ballot that has its secrecy envelope is actually being done by weight. The Pitney Bowes machines will weigh envelopes that seem light and kick them into another flow. I am not crystal clear on what the poll observer process is for the ballots that will be counted in Chester County in a gymnasium at Westchester University, starting at 7 a.m. on Thursday, but that's a whole separate topic where people can also get involved for very fruitful discussions about that slightly more centralized version of vote counting.
Great. So we're out of questions. But this has been a great conversation. I've learned a lot. I don't know if either John and Dan, if either of you have any final thoughts.
I would love to know if there's anyone in this room among our participants that wants to get involved as a poll worker, but has been unable to. Okay, cool.
You got one right here. So
yeah, that's great. I think what we might do is I might publish some helpful steps for being like, no, seriously, I'm kind of come and help. Because by the time you find your judge of elections and get a hold of them, you probably can help there. It's sort of like getting past the middle layer that is tricky, and we can help you with that. So if I encourage any of our participants, if you're also in that boat, we can possibly help you get over the hump.
That's great. Yeah, I know why my my particular precinct or my area of the city has been tough for me to for me to get the attention. It's for the same reasons that everyone's been outlining here. There's just massive numbers of people who want to help, and they're floating through those. But I'm navigating through some of my local folks who can help out too. Well, thank you both for everything that you do. Even, obviously prior to this, this election has sort of brought back a lot more interest than we normally get. But hopefully this will encourage people to, vote more often. I think we always need more people to vote. Dan, I didn't give you a chance. If you like, John gave his last thoughts and then I jumped in and I didn't really hand it over to you to see if you have any.
That's okay. I think like my big takeaway as a poll worker, as a designer, is just to talk to people, to get their thoughts, ask people how the voting process went for them, ask questions of your poll workers in your precinct and things like that. I mean, be reasonably, you're not trying to particularly slow up the process, but I think like the more transparency that you can have in this, and like you can learn a lot just from the experience, and you can make it significantly better just by asking questions, and really participating again, like in this like local space of yours. I think it's a really special thing to be involved in.
Yeah, that's great. I'll let everyone know, like I actually voted on Sunday. My wife and I filled out our ballots and went over to Roxborough High School, which is one of the places in the city of Philadelphia where you can drop off your ballots. It was a very fluid process. They were practicing all kinds of safe distancing. They had a table where they help people out if they don't know how to hand their ballots in. But it seems to be a very well-designed process, and I can't speak for every other county, but in Philadelphia, at least they've kind of worked that out. So that's something to think about if you're in Philadelphia County. Well, okay, so let's do, let me just hit a couple of wrap-up slides here. I have to do this in the right order. So I'm gonna share my screen. I'm gonna hit play over here. And, oh, you can see all my chat windows that are open and all that kind of fun stuff too. So let me move that stuff out of the way. All right, so for those of you who are still with us, there's 11 attendees still in the room. We are going to be sending out a follow-up email with links to everything Dan and John referenced, and we'll pull any links that were shared in chat around that. There is a survey that we will be sending out to folks. It would be great if you could give us some feedback on this webinar. We'd like to improve everything that we're working on. If you want to chat with Dan or John about something that you heard today, we are offering virtual coffee with them. It says him, but it should say them. And so there's a link here, and that link is also being shared in chat. If you want to get together with them and talk a little bit about your experiences or get some advice with them. We have those 2 upcoming webinars and workshops. One is on modernizing a platform to democratize data. The next one is on inclusive design. That's a workshop, creating a bias-informed organization. And Dan actually gave you a little preview. We are going to be doing a workshop on service design as well. So if you are in the experience design industry and you want to learn a little bit more about service design, stay posted. We'll be posting some links to that soon. You can see that on our social media channels, or if you keep track of attend another webinar or something like that, you'll be able to get into that. So thank you very much, John and Dan. And thank you everyone who attended. We will, now I'm trying to figure out how to get out of these screens so I can get back to the, oh my gosh, everything's in the way. I think I've stopped sharing my screen, right? Was I sharing my screen?
You actually didn't start sharing your
screen. I
screen.
wasn't even sharing my screen. Okay.
The links were in the chat.
Everything's in the chat. I'm sorry about that. Thank you, John and Dan. Thank you for all of our behind the scenes elves that actually help out on these webinars. And thank you for everyone for attending. And we'll see you at the next webinar. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Phil. Bye.